All right. So I have two essential questions to pose and go over, and then whatever stems from that. So the two essential questions are A, what is money, and B, what is economy? I'm going to present two definitions of what I think they should be, not what they necessarily are, but in a perfect world. So money is essentially a physical representation of labor, as in it represents an amount of labor you have done, and you can then trade the value of that labor for something else. Well, physical, now it's physical or digital, but it's a representation of labor. An economy should be, or is, the production, exchange, and use of goods and services, all encompassing in a system somewhere, whether that be at a local level, or a national level, or a global level. So yeah, go from there. Any ideas, thoughts, counterpoints, please?
Yeah, I've got a counterpoint already. Why does it have to be strictly a representation of labor as opposed to a representation of value?
Because labor is something that's valued, so that's implied.
If I own something, though, that's not doing labor for me, and if I sell it, is that not value?
If you're selling it to someone is using their labor to purchase it.
Okay, so
the thing you own, well, I should say, the thing that you want to sell is not money. What is used to purchase that thing is money, which is a representation of that person's labor.
Yeah, but that assumes that all value comes from labor.
Right.
That's Marxism.
No, that's strictly not Marxism. That's the antithesis of Marxism.
Which one am I thinking?
Well, it's definitely early capitalism as well. I mean, Adam Smith definitely subscribed to the labor theory of value, but I would say that in terms of modern economic thought, the Marxist line of thought is the one that has continued to take the labor theory of value and run with it, as opposed to updating something to, like, you know, a utility-based sense of value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of, there's currency, there's money, and then there's value. And I think there's a lot to talk about with currencies, but in terms of what money itself actually is, and also value, those are rich places to discuss. But in terms of the concept of money itself, I posit that money is trust distilled down to its purest essence. And I base that on the fact that when you accept, you know, a currency, or you accept anything that you call money, you're ultimately saying, okay, I believe that at a future time and place, I'm going to be able to exchange this for a set value. And you're trusting that other people are going to accept that in the future.
Right.
And typically, when we see hyperinflation events, these, you know, we have inflation, which you could consider to be, you know, a dilution of trust over time. But hyperinflation events don't really happen because of money printing per se, or diluting the money. Hyperinflation events tend to happen because of something else that greatly destroys the underlying cause of trust. And so in our particular situation right now, we have a petrodollar, you know, formerly a gold-based dollar, and kind of the thing that's there are two things that are keeping our money, you know, having value at this time. One, the military backing to maintain the petrodollar, and two, the fact that the United States government demands that people pay taxes with it. Forgive me, I launched into a whole bunch of different concepts.
That's fine. Go ahead.
You definitely did, yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah, but I would say that money at its core is just, yes, it is the fungible trust that you can transact with and believe that it's going to have value in the future.
Anyone else, please, ideas?
I would agree that anything I say would just be a rephrasing of what was just said.
Yeah.
Okay, Swig, go ahead.
Yeah, you covered it.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree that money is value based on what individual parties consider a good or service or really anything. as worth.
Mhm.
There's a lot of societal elements about what specific money amount they tie to a thing,
Mhm.
and it's different based on the person. Um, for instance, you could take a piece of meat and it's based purely on human um, qualitative um, understanding of that meat, which will determine how much someone will pay for it. So
Mhm.
some meat is wagyu, some is ground chuck. But if you're looking at it from a purely like a robotic perspective, it's not as important. It's the same type of animal part.
Mhm.
Um, so I guess if we were to tie an issue with how money is bound between labor and other labor or goods,
Mhm.
is the standard that it is tied to is arbitrary and tends to change based on based on how much money we're looking at.
Hmm. Interesting.
Especially when you start trading money for money or future
Right.
perspective money.
Right.
You mean like Bitcoin and all that, or
I mean,
or other
stocks.
currencies?
Or yeah, because if when you start using money for things besides just I did work and I bought something with the work I did, when you become it's what they would call people who are in the investor class, even though not everyone who does it is in the investor class, the things that they do. Like
Exactly.
or like trading currencies, like speculating on the dollar versus the yuan or something like that.
Would I
Yeah.
be in the investor class if I have a couple stocks that
No,
say
you would not.
McDonald's and Target?
No,
Oh,
you
there
would
you go. Even though I am investing.
I honestly don't really know if investing is worth it anymore because the future looks extremely uncertain.
Unless you buy Amazon.
Hmm.
So it's going to be the it's going to be the Uniparty and the Uni company.
Okay, then
Controls all-
then if that's what money is, what should money be? What system of either valuing labor and trust and such, what system works well or works better than others? Ideas.
capitalism. Or what do you mean?
Money.
Well, what's a good way to put it?
System of like the defined everyone agrees XYZ coin is worth X to the I don't know. That
For example, like we have fiat currencies, which obviously they don't really work unless you are actually manipulating it. So what is something that might work? There are the ideas of tying money literally to the labor that a country produces. The amount of money that is available is tied directly to essentially GDP, but not quite GDP. There are those kinds of ideas. What are things that are feasible?
I think we're crossing from the question, what is money, to what should money be?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Gotcha.
Well, and my question to you is, there's no way to determine, what ought to be unless you have some sort of, metric by which you're trying to judge, value, right? So, what are you trying to accomplish with your monetary system? We know that fiat currencies are subject to the types of abuses that we see right now.
Sure.
The entire welfare warfare state that we have can only exist in the context of the fiat currency and the Federal Reserve.
Right.
There's this wonderful website called What the Fuck Happened in 1971, where I recommend checking that out. And the basic premise is you can look across all sorts of different charts in the economy, from the average productivity of the worker, and then the growth rate of income,
Mm-hmm.
blah 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 blah, and everything goes haywire in 1971.
Right.
And so
Is that when you can
their
no
premise, yes,
no longer
that's,
buy just a quarter. Oh,
Sorry,
I'm
what was
paying
that?
$1,000 for a buck. Is that the year you can no longer buy groceries for just a quarter or something like that, like old people are always talking about.
I don't know if that's the case, but it's the year that we decoupled from the gold standard.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of meme graphs that show all of the different things that suddenly start to either flatline or just go haywire around that year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and WTF happened in 1971 is a solid amalgamation of them. And of course, correlation is not the same as causation, but when you see so many things go haywire, then you look, okay, what's the explanation?
Mm-hmm.
And the best explanation that I have is that, well, yes, once you decouple the ability to print money from any sort of thing that's based on scarcity, then yeah, the government's just going to run haywire and print money all day long
Right.
to accomplish what they want to accomplish, and we've seen that.
Like Zimbabwe and
we've
Venezuela.
But the problem here is because we haven't seen it in hyperinflation yet, but what we have seen is massive inequality, because most of those dollars just get pumped, into asset classes that most people don't have possession of.
Well, that's like what's happening right now.
It's exactly what's happening
Yes.
right now. It's the largest single transfer of wealth from the middle class to the rich ever. And
Oh, it's not just the middle class. It's everyone except for like the super rich, like the people who talked about like the 1%. It's like that's a drop in the bucket compared to what's happening right now.
Yes, and look, I am hardly a Bolshevik. I'm a kick-ass capitalist, but I mean this is not capitalism.
No, it's the antithesis.
Right here.
It's the antithesis
Yes.
of capitalism.
Yes, yes. But going back to the question that you asked, what in terms of what would be a better monetary system, once again, what do we consider to be better, and what do we want to accomplish? Because for all of the flaws in what we have presently, let's not pretend that we didn't get the iPhone under the current arrangement. We got to the moon happened before that, but think of all the advances that we've had under this system, and there's no way to prove whether or not they would have happened under another system.
Right.
Like one of the things that I think about Bitcoin is, because Bitcoin functions like digital gold. There's in 2100 there's going to be a finite issuance, and then from that point forward it's going to become a deflationary currency. And I sit here and I wonder if under an inflationary currency everything is debt fueled. Does that mean that under a deflationary currency everything would be equity fueled? Right. The only way to get starting capital from in a purely Bitcoin economy, right?
Which is very unlikely to happen, but
yeah.
But thought exercise. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the most likely circumstance is that we'll have a crypto economy with some fiat, because I think that there's a place for all of it. But Bitcoin itself would just be, once again an asset, a longer term asset. But yeah, my question is, in a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, or just any deflationary currency, do we switch from a debt-based system to an equity-based system? Or the only way to, because one of the big advantages of the current system that we have is that it's subject to collapse every 100 years or so, and just complete and total God, everything sucks. But in the meantime, if you have some brilliant idea and you can convince a couple of people to throw some money at you, you can see that idea to fruition.
Yeah, I agree. I would say when you say what are you striving for with your money, or I would say what are you striving for? I would think that would really go towards your economy in general and what you were striving for. And I see the big dichotomy being whether you're striving towards economic stability or economic freedom, because those are usually fundamentally opposed. So you would have to be leaning more towards one in what you are striving towards. No objections? Cool, I'm right.
Well, I actually just cut out for the last 20 seconds. So you might have just been smearing yourself and then screaming at the winds. I have no idea.
That happened.
like when you said what are you striving for with your like your money or whatever, I would say that would be more towards what you're striving for with your basis of what your economy is. And I think the biggest argument there is whether or not you're going for economic stability or economic freedom, because they are usually presented as a dichotomy.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean, just as an unabashed capitalist, it would be economic freedom all the time, no matter what. You can't change my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Like
I also...
total anarchy or what? That freedom.
No, it would essentially be the closest I could think of, honestly, would be the robber barons of the late 1800s, which has its problems, but the 100% the other side would be literal state capitalism, or I'm sorry, state communism, which is I can't find a good reason to have other than none of us are going to starve, but you know, nothing else is going to be very good.
Mediocre.
See, a problem with like what Buddy said there earlier, like if you can, you know, convince someone of your idea, you can make it happen if they've got the capital.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the idea of a planned economy, frankly, just because who's in charge of it, who decides, like especially right now with the lockdowns, who decides what's essential?
Mm-hmm.
And bureaucrats are idiots.
Mhm.
Will have their
See,
own agendas.
I'm not sure I accept the dichotomy between freedom and stability.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that the freer an economy is, the more subject to short-term instability that economy and its people are.
Mm-hmm.
But the more controlled an economy is, the more that distortions lie uncorrected for longer periods of time, leading to much greater instability, you know.
Leading
so
to
you
collapse,
might have-
essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, you might have 20 years where everything seems pretty stable, but then suddenly, oh no, it turns out that we have seen massive amounts of malinvestment because the government, you know, continued to manipulate interest rates, and then, oh shit, it turns out that people engaged in, you know, ventures that wouldn't have been profitable otherwise.
Gee, it's almost like
And-
you're talking about something currently occurring.
The housing market crash or whatever.
Did y'all know that there's so much negative yielding debt right now in the
Oh, yeah.
world, but most of that's institutionally faced.
Mm-hmm.
The first 0% consumer-facing loan occurred in Norway this past week, where you can get a 20-year mortgage for 0%.
Yep.
Yeah. That's
Is that a good or a bad thing? Is the real question.
It's good for the person. It's terrible for the
Well, yeah.
economy.
yeah. Well, I
don't
mean,
they have
just
some
just like
system anyways?
not really.
I don't know that much about Norway.
Yeah, I mean they have higher taxes and more of a social safety net, but they're definitely ultimately capitalist.
Oh yeah, they're war profiteers, and that's if that's what they want to do, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like you want to
Well,
sell
then,
weapons to both sides? Good for you, buddy.
But let's all remember, if you are a person who holds on to debt, then inflation is your friend. You love inflation. So just keep that in mind.
It depends on
If
what
you're-
kind of debt it is.
Well, if you are a net holder of debt, then I would say that yeah, you definitely want inflation, and if you're a net saver,
Oh yeah,
then
yeah,
you want
sure,
less
sure.
inflation.
Well, yeah, I mean, inflation is just a tax on savings.
Yeah. What kind of debt would inflation be bad for?
Super long-term debt. Like long-term government debt, inflation's very bad for you.
Oh, you mean if you're the holder of the debt?
Yes.
Oh no, I mean if you owe the debt.
Oh, okay. Then yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, debt holders, the longer term the debt that you hold is, you really don't want as much inflation because it parodies out to zero, which at that point you might as well just hold gold or cash.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for if you're the not the if you're the lendee, I guess it would be, not the lender, then yes, inflation, yay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put a fork in it. I'm going to say that the preferred type of money that we have, if we want a balance between freedom and stability, if that even is a dichotomy, and I'm still not sure of that, but for the sake of the argument, I'm just going to go ahead and roll with it until I have a pretty concise way of saying either way, right? But I would say any currency that is at least denominated in some sort of underlying scarce resource, most likely gold, or something like Bitcoin. But basically anything that can rein in the power of the printing press from the government.
That was the next question I was going to ask. Is like, do we need to back the currency with something real? Because like, why would we ever move away from that in the first place? What is the positive of fiat currency, I suppose, is the question.
Something real, like the threat of force.
So
the was for indefinite growth.
Yeah, the word positive isn't an objective positive in that use because it hurts a large portion of the system, even though it helps others. It allows for growth, but to allow for that growth, what you have to do isn't necessarily a positive. That's a very convoluted way of saying that, I know, but it's the only way I can think to say it.
When the value of the currency goes up, but the resource it's backed by gets rarer, like gold or oil from before. In some ways.
Right. Not the greatest answer, but alright.
I would say backing anything with a finite amount of anything, like gold or oil or anything like that, is that it's finite. And yes, there are problems with inflation, especially like overprinting and stuff like that, when there's nothing backing it. But to allow your company, not company, well, government, company, whatever, to grow indefinitely, you kind of need something less tangible than gold.
And we operate in this weird system where people think unlimited growth is a good thing. Which is, which you get problems like Japan, where their population is shrinking, but their economy is somehow expanding, which shouldn't be possible.
Automation.
Oh no, it's lying. That's how they just lie about. They fudge books. It's what happened. What happened in 1990 in Japan. What's happening right now. It's like what's happening on Wall Street right now.
Well, I'm not saying that they're not fudging the books, but I am going to go ahead and disagree that a falling population necessarily has to coincide with a lower GDP or lower.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
It doesn't. I should rephrase. It doesn't have to, but in the situation that is occurring, it really should, because just everything that's occurring over there, they are not producing what the amount they're saying they're producing with the population they have, and you can tell just by doing a cursory glance.
In what ways are you looking at?
They literally aren't producing the amounts that they were producing 20 or 30 years ago in industry, in technology, and yet they have less people, but they're somehow producing more amounts on the books. It's because of fiat currency. They're saying they're producing this amount of money.
I see what you're saying.
Okay.
Like what you're saying is the real GDP has gone down, but
yes.
the nominal GDP has gone up.
Yes.
Okay,
their GDP has inflated in terms of actual numbers, but the actual value of those numbers is far lower than it was 30, 40 years ago.
And I always thought that was more based on the fact that they literally just got out of a 50-year depression. So if they're growing, it's just because they had nothing before.
You'd think that, wouldn't you?
They literally had the worst depression in world's history.
Well, it wasn't 50. It was 1990 until 1990 until about 20. I don't know, 2015. That year's probably wrong, but.
No, they had decades even before 1990. It was something between the 60s and the early 2000s that they had it.
Well, the 80s in Japan were like the roaring 20s in the U.S.
With Sony and all that.
It was.
I mean, there used to be fears that Japan was going to buy all the real estate in the United States.
Yeah.
Too late. China's already got it.
Yeah. But
And Canada.
I'll be back right shortly.
okie doke. Okay, so we kind of went into what kind of a scarcity a currency based on a scarce asset would be probably the best form of money we can think of.
Well, it also carries its own problems, though.
Oh, sure.
Because like one of the ways that our current economy is fueled is, well, okay, so the bank essentially makes up money out of nowhere through fractional reserve system, which even itself is diluted compared to sweep accounts. It's a thing.
Yeah.
But so they essentially print money out of nowhere, and
Yes.
like there's this cycle where debt is consistently issued, and down the line, at some point, the consumer has to be able to make that money and make it more to be able to pay up those chain of debts. And so you actually constantly need a greater supply of money in the economy to
Yes.
pay down the debts so that the whole thing doesn't collapse.
Right.
And the question is, you know, maybe the system as it stands right now with a fiat currency causes this problem in the first place, going once again back to malinvestment. Maybe you wouldn't have a situation where things were dire if everyone was just smarter with how they chose to invest their money, and having having it pegged to some sort of scarce resource would stop all that malinvestment. Or you could have a situation where it just slows down innovation a lot, and under a system like that we wouldn't have the iPhone until 2050. I have no idea.
Right. Which I guess that would then that would become an either a moral or an ethical question of if the means justify the end, or the ends justify the means.
Yeah. For all of the the question is, would the pace of innovation progress at the same rate if we didn't have this system that also produces malinvestment simultaneously? And this is a totally unfalsifiable question, so I would veer on the side of, well, we already have the iPhone, so let's move towards a monetary system that isn't subject to creating a welfare warfare state. Let's do that, and then see what happens after that. But yeah, we have no idea what would have happened in the 100 years before now.
I think the better question would be, are we willing to forsake getting the next iPhone-like event for 50 years instead of 10 years if that 50 years was not as much of an economic shitstorm?
I mean, this is also unfalsifiable, and there's no counterfactual, because what if the next iPhone-like event is a pill that you can take that monitors all of your fluids, yada yada yada.
Right.
Gives you tells you the exact nutritional intake you want, prevents disease, spots cancer before it's hell if I know, right?
Right.
Because I mean you have to think that the iPhone is not just a consumer invention. I mean, realistically, you've got a powerful computer in your pocket with an access to effectively the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you have the gumption and the charisma and the intention, you could effectively start a business with literally nothing but your iPhone. Right.
Sure. People have.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, I would posit this, and the communists never like it when I say this, but
how dare you?
If you if you could, because they care about inequality, and I'm just like, well, Dude, if equality were a goal to strive for, just kill everybody and then they'll be equal.
Exactly.
Right? Like, I mean, we are an ape-like warrior species, and someone having something shinier than other people just pisses them off. So at some point, we do have to account for that.
Sure.
Like, it's anti-human to not take equality into consideration at all.
Right.
But if we go back to the original socialist stance of socialism being the ownership of the means of production by the working class, I would say that the iPhone has been the democratization of capital. And that effectively we've achieved socialism already.
Yeah, I get that line of thinking. I get the point there. Yeah, I wouldn't fundamentally disagree.
Yeah. Which I think ultimately just shows us, because let's face it, I think I'm a pretty bright guy, and I've started 2 failed businesses.
Nice.
Right. But they failed. And right now, I'm working a 9 to 5. Okay, I have all of the advantages of modern technology, and I'm debt-free. If I were, some sort of Ubermenchian character, I should be a billionaire. You know what? I'm not an Ubermenchian character. So I am just another schmuck trying to get along. And so I think that if we take that bent on what socialism and the distribution of capital is, I think that the reason that we ultimately see inequality in the world is exactly because people aren't all the same.
Well, no, people, as much as the idea that all men are created equal, I mean, that's not true. It's that all men are equal, say, under the eyes of the law. But you are created unequal from everyone else. You are fundamentally unequal. Existence is, by its nature, discriminatory. You might be born disabled. There, existence has discriminated against you. Deal with it.
Survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
Yep. Darwinian.
Well, I'm not going to go straight into Spencerian Darwinianism.
I would say that the universe as itself would probably just throw that survival of the fittest at you. What a society chooses to do with that is up to them.
Well, no, I agree, but part of the very nature of being human is being social.
Sure.
And that's our strength, and our ability to care for our sick and our weak is our strength as well. Like one of the biggest argument against eugenics that I've ever come up with is Stephen Hawking, right? Because there's going to be a point in the future that you'll be able to identify Lou Gehrig's disease in vitro, and then the question is, do you want to raise a child to term that's going to have Lou Gehrig's disease? And I'm going to go, well, shit, we got Stephen Hawking. It is impossible to know who's going to be the next Hitler,
right?
And who's going to be the next Stephen Hawking. So
Stephen Hawking was Stephen Hawking before he got diseased.
I think it's just an example.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I'm assuming that there is a genetic component to Lou Gehrig's disease.
Well,
right?
And there's also just the simple thing, like you might have someone who they're like, oh, these are the genetic markers for autism, but there are autistic people who do more than I do. So are you going to off them in the womb? So that's probably an easier example.
Yeah, well, the thing is, we already practice eugenics. It's just how
Yeah.
far we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we can fix a disabled spine in the womb, but now you just don't want to choose the eye color because that's racist,
Right.
or whatever.
Anyway, I'm gonna cut
we
this.
all
I'm
know
gonna
green
cut
is the
this.
best.
I'm gonna cut this tangent off because we are 1,600 miles off of topic, but I do appreciate it.
My bad.
No, it's fine. I just there's other nights for other discussions. Don't worry, there's a schedule. So we kind of went over money and came to some agreements. How about economy? I put forth that an economy is the production, exchange, and use of goods and services. Is there any objection to that definition?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The production, exchange, and use of goods and services is either what an economy is or what it should be.
I will posit something different.
Go for it.
I think that's a close approximation, but I'm just going to go straight textbook here. An economy is a system for figuring out how to distribute scarce resources amongst limitless wants and desires.
Okay.
I would say that there's too many definitions, too many types of economies to narrow it down. If we're just talking about basic economy, then it's just the system of exchange. You can exchange money for goods, goods for goods.
Okay, that's
for
pretty
goods.
much what I said. Just even simpler.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just used more words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and forgive me for being pedantic, and maybe I am being overly pedantic here. Like there's the thing, and then there's the mechanism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because hypothetically, you could have an economy without exchange. It would be terrible.
Right.
It would be awful. Like literally, like if you just had a whole bunch of people and you put them in cages, and then you a prison is an economy without exchange, right? I mean, they have black markets within the prison.
Right.
But the prison itself, the top-down hierarchy of, okay, you're in this cage, we're going to deliver food to you, we're going to meet your bare minimum requirements. It neither allows the individual to determine their own wants and desires, nor how to get to those without going through the black market.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the prison itself, yeah. But the economy, so exchange is one of the mechanisms of an economy, and the ideal mechanism, and pricing is the metric that we use to determine the exchange.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the economy itself is just that system that allocates resources based on scarce resources based on limitless desires.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then from that, I guess the big question is, how should economies operate? What are the better systems? What are the worst systems? What works? What doesn't work? Etc. Just ideas. I'm trying to keep it general, but whatever you think. Anyone?
I would say just keep it simple. But the most important thing is that the buyer chooses the price.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's based on what you believe it's worth. Because if you just sell a toothpick for $1,000, nobody's going to buy that.
Mm-hmm.
But if one person does, then it is worth $1,000 to that person.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I agree.
So, on that line of thinking, though, doesn't that allow for easy money laundering? By
Sure.
Blank sheets of paper for trillions of dollars?
Sure.
Modern art.
Yes, but wouldn't it be kind of unethical to have the government limit the price that you can sell something at?
Yes, it would be.
Of course, that goes into how far capitalist do you want to go? Because a purely capitalist system is an anarchic system that doesn't work. So the question becomes how much control do you place over that capitalist system so that it functions in a...
We do not have...
Go ahead.
We do not have any evidence as to whether or not an anarchic economic system would work or not work.
Well, anarchy...
I mean, it wouldn't... Well, the thing is, if there's no control whatsoever, it would devolve into just people shooting each other for resources or clawing each other to death. That's observable in nature.
So have y'all ever heard of God, what was the name of it? It was a walled city in China.
Oh yes.
That was yes.
I can't remember the name of it.
Yes, but that is the closest to an anarchist system that I've ever heard of.
Mm-hmm.
It literally had gang members. God, what was it called? It was the Yakuza, whatever.
Yeah.
They ran the mail. They took care of the elderly. They took care of services. They were the police and everything. And they still did crime all in the same time. They would rob you, but then they would also take your take care of people that were extorting you.
So I don't understand how this is distinguished from any other government.
Yeah, that's exactly.
It isn't. It's a system. It's a system of control and power.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing that.
Yeah, I think that all governments are mafias, and all mafias. Well, not all mafias are governments, but all governments are definitely mafias.
I mean, government is an evil, but generally speaking, a necessary evil for most people.
Yeah, I would say that.
That's also the system you described wasn't anarchy.
It wasn't?
No. Anarchy is literally every man. Pure anarchy. I'm talking pure 100% down the scale anarchy is literally every man or maybe every family for themselves with nothing, no overarching bodies whatsoever.
Then I would honestly disagree with that.
That's what anarchy is. Now, if you want to,
that's not what anarchy is.
It is though.
It is. What you're positing is like what either what ANCAPs call ANCAP, which isn't ANCAP, or what anarcho-communists call anarcho-communism, which still has an overarching system of some kind.
Well,
pure anarchy is nothing. It's literally every man for himself. And what I'm saying is that really wouldn't, it couldn't function, which is why we don't observe it, because that's why we don't, because it couldn't function.
It lasts for about 5 minutes in that pure state.
Yeah.
And
then some system is placed over top of it by whoever has the most strength or gold.
So it becomes feudal again.
Yeah. You could argue that that's very close to anarchy, which that's probably a worthy argument, but pure anarchy can't exist except in a vacuum for a very short amount of time.
I mean the most obvious proof of your claim is that we don't have a pure anarchist system on the Earth. So there's not really a counter.
Well, no, we don't have one that we have them, but they're for very short periods of time, and it's usually after disease or war.
Well, that's what I'm saying is
right.
The biggest counter argument to what I'm saying is the fact that there's no stable anarchist system. But overall, I veer towards an economic system that allows the most freedom as possible. No price controls. No, you allow the market to sort everything out.
Well, I think there's issues with that too, because, in my opinion, I wouldn't think that a purely unrestricted capitalist society would go into anarchy. I think it would be controlled. It would probably be more akin to communism than anything else.
Well, what would happen most likely is someone would start to accumulate vast amounts of wealth, and then they would start to place systems on top of everything that they controlled.
Well, yeah, exactly, but honestly, it would be more like, I don't know, have you ever seen Sorry for Bothering You?
I don't think so.
Alright, well, it's basically like unrestricted capitalism. There's this dude who's basically runs a Walmart, and then he starts doing these lifetime contracts with his workers. And they lived there, he fed them and everything, but they couldn't leave. There was a lifetime contract. And it was basically like China, where you just live and die for the people that you worked for. So I think that unrestricted capitalism, completely unrestricted capitalism, would be more akin to a communist society than anything else.
Some good examples of what is close to unrestricted capitalism is what happened in the United States between the Civil War and the Great Depression in the West and in certain parts of the country, where you had people who would create monopolies because there was no government control anywhere, and they became governments unto themselves. Because there were no restrictions on top of them, so they abused capitalism to the point that they became the antithesis of it.
Same thing happened with the Great Depression.
Well, I mean, I would lay that argument at least up until 1913. Except, wasn't that also the Great Trust Busting era?
That's what the.
Or am I getting my time frames wrong?
No, you're sort of right. I'm trying to remember. The early 1900s is the pinnacle of trust busting with Teddy Roosevelt and Standard Oil and everything. Yeah,
but here's the deal. So, my understanding of the situation with Standard Oil is, they created the market, right?
Sure. Yeah, pretty much. Almost by themselves.
Yeah, and at one point they had a 90% control of it.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of the thing that ultimately brought them down, wasn't the rulings of the courts. It was the fact that they didn't have any ability to stop people from nosing in on their business, and they were losing market share.
Mm.
I mean, they were losing market share prior to Standard Oil actually being busted up.
Mm-hmm.
They were on their way down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, no, it's interesting you bring that up because I think there's a parallel with that in social media right now. They're talking about breaking up like big tech, even though as we speak, they're starting to lose market share to alt tech right now, which is an interesting parallel.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only danger there is though that they're, I mean, I think we've probably all seen the Stone Toss comic where it's like, well, why don't you build your own social media? Why don't you build your own payment processor? Why don't you build your own government?
Yeah.
Because they are attacking the infrastructure behind that.
Yes.
But
like that's what happened to Parler a few days ago.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. But I do want to hop back real quick because to me, there's a difference between profits and rents. Rents are defined as profit/wealth that is extracted not from creating mutual value, but rather from limiting the market or competition in some fashion. And I would argue that the worst excesses of quote unquote what we call capitalism are when you see the state and the corporations working together,
fascism,
to maintain fascism. Thank you. Exactly.
Actual fascism, not what people pretend fascism is, right?
Which yes, we do in fact live in a fascist country. Or, well,
what country do you
a country with
I live in America.
A country with definitely does have fascist tendencies at points.
Yes.
Yes, that's fine. Yes, that is a statement of fact.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess the question would be, I think everyone has come to the general agreement that they want the market to be as free as possible.
Well, with limits.
But as free as possible. The question becomes...
What are the limits?
That's what I'm saying. The question is, where are the limits placed? What needs to be limited? Where does, say, a government or some other system, if we come up with that in the future, where does it step in? What is its responsibility? How does it regulate?
I think we can all agree that utilities like electricity, water, shit like that needs to be regulated.
Yes, but I also think
we can also agree that food regulations are very important, so you're not just throwing poison into fucking supermarkets.
So I actually...
Okay, one at a time, we'll go with spirits, since you've said the least.
Okay, well, on utilities, I also think that we should add utilities, not just the needs to survive, but also internet, because I believe it should be a right to the internet, free speech, everything. But think about, like, if a company gets so big, Twitter, Google, Facebook, stuff like that, I think that they should follow under utility laws where you cannot discriminate against somebody using it. Because right now, big companies are just taking away our rights of free speech.
Yeah, they do whatever they want.
So if they are, like, so big that you can control not only our, like, day-to-day lives, but big events like the political goings-on in the country, because we're seeing that even now today with Twitter and Facebook. I think that they should be like a utility.
Business world that you like, literally the government has to step in and say, no, you can't do this anymore.
So I would say that what the agreement here is that whatever a utility is, that they cannot arbitrarily choose to not let you use that utility. Pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah, so I would say like Google would probably should probably be a utility.
I would say pretty much any internet provider should be a utility.
Yeah.
It's hard to say that because like I need a precedent for this. Was electricity considered a privilege, not a right, back in the day?
I'm pretty sure clean water was at some point. Like running water was. Pretty much everything is. It has to be declared a utility at some point. It doesn't start as that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think an underlying issue is we have had unprecedented technological advances in, I don't know, even the last decade, but certainly the last 100 years. And our systems of governance and currency
have not kept up.
And communication, they all haven't really kept up. And we aren't really sure how to handle it. And we were talking earlier about would we be willing to, delay the next iPhone type event, like big leap forward in technology? I think we should probably acclimate to the one that we have right now before moving forward. Like, we don't even know how to deal with free speech on the internet right now.
Right.
It's like,
well, I mean, the answer to that's pretty obvious. I mean, it's literally just free speech. It doesn't matter where it is. It's just simple that.
well,
I don't know how that's
obvious to
question.
us.
It's obvious. It's obvious to people who don't have horrible, nefarious intentions, but there's a lot of those.
Or to those that can be swayed by them.
I wanted to add to that thought about the technology progressing, because like there are certain problems government solves, things like transactional frictions and information asymmetries and yada yada yada. And so my question is, going back to, and I don't know the answer to this, so I'm not necessarily
That is
proposing
perfectly
this.
fine. You don't have to have an answer.
Fuck you. But my question is going back to the food regulations, right? Well, so 100 years ago, a bad batch of meat going out, right, that would kill hundreds of people, thousands of people. But we now live in a state where what if you had a system where instead of having food safety inspectors, you basically just have the news and Yelp and Twitter, and someone goes out and they go, holy shit, I got Legionella from this, and then of course you could sue the shit out of the company. There's, a way of enforcing that. Maybe you end up with a higher number of dead people in terms of. This is one of the things is, it's very difficult to monitor the difference. There are tangible effects and non-tangible effects, right? So how many more people would live a better life if food prices were slashed 10% a year because of reduced regulatory expenses, versus the amount of people that would be harmed if we had a system of enforcement that was crowdsourced? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you mean.
And sorry, I'll shut up after this last point, because this has been one of the things that's been driving the arguments between lockdowns versus not lockdowns, is because as a politician, someone can say, oh, those 5 people died because of COVID, and you go, holy shit, I fucked up. But it's much less direct case to say there was an X% higher suicide rate, X% higher overdose rate. And so, yeah, one of the things that we have to think about when talking about economics is there is that huge incentive to take the tangential, as more important than the tangible over the non-tangible as the metric, right?
True, but there's an issue with that where, obviously, I'm guessing that most of you are Americans.
Yep.
Okay. Well, in Canada, they have started putting us in curfews. So the point I'm trying to make there is, like, you try and say, like, if you didn't lock down people, if you'd point to these deaths as being, like, just COVID deaths, and they can, get in trouble. They can say, like, you could have prevented this kind of thing. But as the other guy said, there's a point where you've kind of gone too far.
That more comes down to, like, just a basic freedom. That's not. I wouldn't call that economic related.
Yeah, we've kind of. I kind of went on a tangent there. But
that's okay.
But it is economic related, because going back to what we were just talking about, or what I was just talking about, with food safety, right? Like, is having a lack of enforcement of food safety, could that under certain circumstances actually lead to having more or less the same death rate or illness rate, but also having a lot less regulatory expense? And like I said, I don't know the answer to that, but whenever I think about questions of regulation and how the economy,
well, that would then venture into morality and ethics.
Well, actually, I think I can give the clear answer for that. We clearly have regulations on this stuff for a reason. Say in the past, a lot of people were dying because of that, and we prevented that. We look into that. The second thing I would want to say on that is make sure you know why the fence was put up before you try and take it down. And the third thing I have to say on that is, if we were to get rid of those regulations this instant, things would be better for a time. And then, as people get lazy and the regulations aren't there to kick them in the ass, then it gets bad.
Well, yeah.
Well, and,
go ahead.
I sorry to keep it around. I agree with all of that, but the big difference is 100 years ago, we didn't have the Twitters and the Parlors and the Yelps, right? Like right now, if someone got sick from eating some food, they could get on the internet and instantly tell
millions
the whole world,
of people would know.
Yeah, like, holy shit, I just got diarrhea from this bad sausage from X brand, and I'm going to sue the shit out of them, right?
All right.
And you would have lawyers lining up around the block for class action suits. You would have, you know, so, I mean, it kind of relies on a strong tort system and...
all right.
Well, and the question, the question there becomes, which would be more effective, I assume.
Okay, but there's a problem with that. I get diarrhea if I eat too much dairy, even though I'm not lactose intolerant. It's just a thing with me and chocolate milk. If I ate any chocolate milk or yogurt or whatever and got diarrhea from that, could I sue? Would I have to prove that, you know, I'm not just being a dick and wants money? See, where the issue.
Sure, and that
regulations at least give them a level of
that gets to a question of efficiency and then morality and ethics.
Yes, it does.
Because I mean, maybe I'm just making it too complicated, but I would imagine also. Well, I would imagine that in such a system, you would also probably some enterprising individual would come up and go, I'll bet you I could produce Listeria test strips really, really cheaply.
Yeah.
And anyone who was actually afraid of food poisoning could test their own food.
Right.
Now the question is, would the net cost of this to the consumer remain the same as if the regulations stayed in place?
You mean like them having to buy their own strips and test all their own food versus just knowing it's probably good via regulatory overbody?
Yeah, well, and let me also make something. There is one thing that we haven't considered yet in this whole equation, right? With every single regulation, there is a trade-off, and that is the regulatory cost. And the thing with the regulatory cost is regulatory costs tend to be fixed costs, meaning that when you're looking at investments, when you're looking at yields, you're amortizing that fixed cost over a much larger asset base is more profitable, right? So regulations ultimately push consolidation of industries. Well, in the cases of food, the more regulated an industry is, the more you're pushing that consolidation, the more you might have one sick cow being mixed into the meat of 10,000 other cows, right? Is there actually a perverse effect of regulation and centralization to the increase of disease in the food supply? I don't know the answer, but I'm just pointing. I would
I would venture a guess, and this is just a guess, that because centralization does that in general, it would probably apply in that case as well. Just a guess. So that takes us back to the question: is at what point should there be regulation? For example, we gave that would be like the FDA as an example. The FDA does serve a purpose. Now, obviously, it's not perfect because it's a human-made system and it has all of its flaws. So, like, at what points does regulation become overreaching, and does it negatively affect a free-ish market, I guess would be the question. Where is the line?
I think
because it has to be somewhere. Just we're humans, we have to draw an arbitrary line somewhere because everything's arbitrary to a point.
Yeah, and it is arbitrary, but I think the reason why it's so hard to kind of nail down is that regulations become more necessary as your economic area expands
and complexifies.
Yeah, as people move around more, you run into more potential risk that someone will move into an area run a really bad business and make a profit and then leave.
Yeah, that's what we call a vulture capitalist.
Yeah.
Which isn't a capitalist, but we call him that. Sears is a good example. But yeah.
Oh,
now.
God.
I suppose
Wait.
I was thinking smaller scale, but it would
Sure.
certainly grow up. But I was thinking like you get a new butcher in your town, and sells you tainted meat, and at that point you might need regulation. But if you had someone who was invested heavily in the area, they would be more careful.
Right, and then they might pull out investments, and that might collapse parts of the town, and then you get a domino effect, and then you get a ghost town.
Yep.
Yeah, I see that.
But yeah, as far as regulations go, bigger government, bigger economy, more travel. Regulations, yeah.
I would posit that any regulation that exists should be the referee approach, where it has to be a rule that, to be a regulation, it needs to be a rule that has to be followed by everyone equally.
Yep.
And any other kind of regulation is just like no, generally. No arguments? Cool. No. No, go ahead. Swig, go ahead.
Do you think that would change based on the size of the facility? You know.
Yeah. No, what I should it's how should I be like? I want to make this as I would metaphor it as the government should, when it comes to economics, the government should act as a referee in a sports contest. There is a set of rules that everyone must follow. The government's job is to enforce those rules equally for all parties.
I would agree. Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Well, I was going to say I absolutely agree with that. I just don't ever see that happening in practice.
No, because human beings tend to be, humans, and they screw things up, and they have, ulterior motives.
Yeah. Well, it's, I guess, I mean, the classic reason for having regulations is externalities, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that I can get behind. Although there are definitely, like, if you start getting into, like, which I don't fully understand, but if you start getting into the Coase theorem, basically Coase worked out a methodology by which people would figure out how to price externalities. I'm not sure how practical that is in reality, although now, once again, we have the internet.
Right.
Like the classic example that he gives is you might have, you have the farmers, and then you have someone who's wanting to build a train or a factory or some other thing, right, that's going to impact the farmer's land. Well, hypothetically, the farmers, and we'll say factory, the factory owner can come to some sort of agreement and price out, okay, you can pollute this much, pay us this much, and we're not going to come in with pitchforks and,
right.
Have our way with your wife and daughter and all that jazz,
Jesus.
right? I don't know how practical that is. I know that it can't happen in a. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling at this point.
It's fine.
Let's see. I don't know. I do think that to stop externalities, I just think that most regulations at this point exist purely as barriers to entry.
Well, yeah. I don't think they're outside of, a certain political group I won't mention. I don't think many people would disagree with you on that. I mean, if no business owner would, that's for sure. And as a business owner, I do not.
Do you mind if I ask what kind of business you're in?
Education.
Okay.
How many schools do you own?
I wish. Private education is the only education that works. Don't at me, bro. But yeah. Any other ideas, thoughts, comments, concerns, questions?
No thoughts here.
right then. I guess that wasn't too bad. We got a little tangenty there for a good 10-15 minutes, but that's okay. I enjoy. Otherwise, thank you for your input. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, this was
fun.
It was interesting.
All right.
Right on.
And to anyone out there, thank you for listening.